we go.
All right, people. Hello, welcome once again. Me and Balint here sitting in the studio waiting to expand your minds, to reduce the level of, I'm going to say it, ignorance. I'm sorry, I mean no offense to anyone, and I've said it before, I don't have a problem with ignorance, but we have to recognize that with ignorance comes the opportunity to allow somebody else in who's going to tell you a load of crap and then you're going to believe it. So we need to fight against ignorance. And we're going to fight against ignorance in this episode of Black Sheep, talking about Hungary, of course. And this time we're going to touch a little bit on something which is possibly the hottest of all hot political potatoes, democracy and the idea of democracy deficit. What was that again? This is something which is... We are branded. Hungarians are branded and have been for several years now, especially by liberals in the US. Not so much now because they've kind of taken a back seat, but the European Union love to say that there is a deficit of democracy in Hungary, which is fantastic. Everyone says, oh, wow, that's great, thanks. Nobody knows what the bloody hell it means, but it's negative. Me and Balint would suggest that the reverse is actually true.
Yeah, Hungarians are known for their thriving for freedom and not always democracy, but for freedom.
Yeah.
And we had, I think, the most revolutions in Europe, maybe apart from the French.
Oh, yeah, but the French Revolution was just the introduction of communism before they gave it a name. So,
not definitely, but that's another issue. But almost in every 100 years we had to revolt against someone. So saying that we are facing a dictatorship which we impose on ourselves voluntarily is just an outright lie. So.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, the trouble is that what people in the West tend to forget is that if we look back to the 20th century, then essentially Hungarians have got experience of communism and of Nazism. Well, yeah. And so there we've got two, well, okay, some would say that they're closer together than they like to present themselves. Anyway, the point is that Hungarians have had experience of propaganda because both of those systems are up to their necks. They are based on
basically propaganda,
essentially. And what we see now happening again is very reminiscent of what used to happen, where they'd say, well, it's been variously attributed to Goebbels or to Stalin. It really doesn't matter. Essentially, it fits both of them, where they say a tactic, the easiest tactic, is to accuse your opponent of that you're doing yourself. And we see this all the time.
Yeah, I have a saying that we have the dubious pleasure or the dubious privilege of having undergone both most destructive dictatorships in the world and probably in the world's history. And we learn to read between the lines, and we haven't forgotten that. And whenever I hear a so-called overly optimistic or definitely aimed propaganda from anywhere in the world, from the Russians, from the US, from Brussels or EU, I see what the true intention is. Not because I'm overly educated in this area, but because we had to learn to read between the lines in a previous system. And Hungary had a special position because we didn't really have, from the 70s, the 60s or 70s, we didn't really have an outright oppression. Mm-hmm. We had a soft dictatorship. Mm-hmm. And soft dictatorship starts with the very same steps what we see today in the EU and what we saw under Biden, Washington as well.
I mean, the other thing which is, I think, it sets alarm bells ringing. It raises red flags when you see that when the Hungarian Prime Minister or any member of the Hungarian government points out to the EU that we can see the parallels between the Soviet Union, that empire, and the European Union, this new empire. And the result, the reaction is immediate. Yeah. Outrage, screaming abuse. It's like Khrushchev at the United Nations. You half expect somebody to take their shoes off and start banging on the table. They are absolutely cut to the quick by the idea that they are somehow behaving in the same way as the Soviet Union, but they are.
Yeah, they are.
We can see this. We can see the signs,
and we still remember. I mean, I'm 53.
You had to check there.
Yeah, I will. But I still remember that when the whole thing, democracy, started 35 years ago in Hungary, they were talking about pluralism. That means that we can have dissenting opinions. We must have in order to have a democracy. And we have freedom of speech. which is continuously shrinking and is shrinked by outside powers.
Yep.
And those things we remember. I remember that we could speak openly in the last years of Kádár era, but there were certain points you couldn't just
they still had taboo subjects,
Yes.
but there was more leeway given. But the strange thing is, if I think back to when I first came to Hungary, which is now, 32 years ago, the interesting thing for me was that there was a very, very it was a completely different situation. In Britain, in the UK, nobody was interested in politics at all. It was voter apathy. It was general political apathy. Everybody was of the opinion, my generation, that, well, essentially there's no difference between this, that, and the other. Who cares? It doesn't really matter. And when I came to Hungary, the appetite for politics, the appetite for political debate, the desire to talk about politics at any given time, the drop of a hat, somebody would start talking about politics. It's like, what the hell's that got to do with food? It's like, nothing, but we want to talk about politics. It's like, and okay, I can understand it. Because essentially, it's like a bottle of champagne that, has been corked up for too long, and you shake it and you shake it and you shake it. And then finally, when you introduce democratic elections into Hungary, then the cork comes out and everybody talks about politics repeatedly ad infinitum. That was strange for me because I came from a system where essentially it's like, well, it's either Labour or it's Conservative, or it's Labour or it's Conservative. And really, in the UK, I see things slightly differently now, but at the time, you had the opinion that, well, both government parties or both parties which want to become government parties, they have the same interests. They want the country to progress. They want things to get better. So really, there wasn't much of a difference. With Hungarian politics, though, that wasn't the situation at all. It still isn't the situation at all, but...
It was formulating. It was
exactly.
Funny thing is, it's a much rather sad thing, we still don't have the so-called national minimum, the national consensus, which way we should go. There were some minor... there was some time when, for example, joining the NATO, joining EU, there were consensus, but nowhere else. And that's the main problem of Hungary, that we didn't have a change of system in the minds of many people. For example, there are a lot of people who thrived under communism and are still trying to say that it was a magnificent thing that we were occupied by 200,000 Soviet troops. And then when they went out, they suddenly changed their course of prayers from Moscow to Washington or Brussels. And the thing is that they will remain the same people who tell us what to do and what to think. And when some problems arise, we ask ourselves the question, why do we need that? Why do we need people who are interested in nothing but staying in power to tell us what to do?
Exactly. But to come back to the democracy idea, I find it outrageous that we are continually exposed to this charge of being somehow deficient in democracy.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if we look to the West, then the way I see it is that we've got the pyramid of power, where we've got, the masses, the people at the bottom, rising to the point where we have the political elite, those who will do what the people desire. And the problem is, as far as I can see, that more we look at, say, for example, Britain, more we look at Germany, more we look at Western Europe, you see that essentially the pyramid has been turned upside down. So we still have the political elite at the top, but now, rather than them listening to what people are saying, we would like you to do this, we would like the country to move in this direction, this is what we feel about this issue or that issue, we've got the situation where for a long, long time now, slowly, steadily, the people have been persuaded, convinced that, no, you don't have the intellectual capacity. We do. We are the politicians. We understand so much more than you. And it becomes this patronizing situation, this patronizing relationship where the politicians tell the people, this is good for you. Believe me, I understand things better than you do. You're too stupid. Or, well, no, you're too illegitimate. Well, I'll find a nice way of putting it, but the message is the same. You're stupid. I'm at the top of the tree. I can see everything. Believe me, I'm doing this for the best. It seems to be a complete negation of democracy.
Yeah, the basic idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, how you said when we were preparing our show, you sent a note that the basic idea of democracy is the...
Demos and kratia. So exactly, the people and power. I mean, if we're not going to have that, and I suggest that in Western Europe, and possibly it's difficult to know. I'm not clear on what the situation is in the States, but if in Western Europe it would seem that the relationship has changed, and now to call it democracy, it's window dressing.
Yeah.
It's to say, well, yeah, everybody knows it's not that, but let's call it that. Yeah. I see this as a huge problem, that we are being accused of that which they are doing. I have a huge problem with this.
Yeah. Well, basically, people, when they speak about Hungary, they always forget that there has been free elections ever since. And even after 1990, when the Communist has collapsed, there were free elections. There were minor interferences, and there were also some minor, how should I say, illegitimate. Yeah, but not something that deeply has influenced the outcome of the vote. That's why we didn't really have any serious popular movements against the result of the votes, because everybody felt that this is our desire, this is what we think about the whole thing, and claiming that there was some nefarious intent behind it and there were some interference behind it, it's clearly outrageous.
It is,
and I think so. Basically, they are, just like you said, they are blaming us for something they usually commit.
Exactly. And we come back to the same thing. I mean, the last national elections in Hungary, people said, oh, well, of course, now the government is going to win because they've moved the borders of the counties, they've moved the borders of the electoral areas. And you shall say, well, yeah, but that's not connected to the government. You go to Britain, they have an electoral commission there, and they do exactly the same thing. Every now and then you have to look at where the people are moving, and you say, we have to get approximately the same number of people in each electoral area. This is nothing.
Normal.
Exactly. This is normal. This is not some trick to move people into one area and keep people out of another area.
And ladies and gentlemen, there's a thing called gerrymandering, which is democratic, not nice, but democratic. And
exactly.
On the other hand, the Hungarian borders of voting, we call it circles, voting areas, hasn't changed since 1990. And there were significant population changes.
Yeah.
Why nobody has changed that before that? It was available to all governments.
Exactly.
Why they haven't do it?
But I mean, the other thing we get is the fact that we're always told that we're being anti-democratic. You can say, well, our democratic system, our system of voting is almost 100% PR. So it's proportional representation. All right, there are slight differences. But if we say that, I'm sorry, but how dare somebody in Britain with a first-past-the-post system where you get 10,000 votes, I get 9,099. They say, well, Gav, you get nothing. Balint wins the election and takes the seat. So you've got these stupid systems where you say, I'm sorry, that's a system which only benefits two major parties. That's it. Yeah. But it doesn't strike me as being particularly democratic. In Hungary, you've got something which is far closer to proportional representation. Last elections in France for the presidential elections, Marine Le Pen was shut out. Why? Yeah. Because they have They've got the two-mandate system, and they were able to, so when they saw that she did very well in the first leg, and say, okay, everybody gangs up and keeps her out.
Yeah.
And you sort of say, well, is that democratic? Because I would suggest that...
Well, it's democratic, but sooner or later it will turn against itself.
Exactly.
We saw it in Germany, for example, in the 20s and the 30s. Everybody knew that the Nazis are something not good. Mm-hmm. And they tried everything to shut them up, but at the end, they couldn't solve Germany's problems, and the population have voted the Nazis into power. There were no stolen elections, there were no putsch, no coup d'etat, nothing. It was a clear and democratic election, which they voted the Nazis into power, and after that they started behaving like dictators, but they came.
But they were elected.
They were elected. And this people say that you see that this is an example how a dictatorship can start. Yes. But how do you know in advance what they're going to do? And if the majority of the voters want to have a system like that, how can you
stop them?
How can you deny it?
What are your grounds for saying no? Well, once again, we come back to the beautiful British example, the Western European example, where people are not going to be allowed to vote for that party because we, the people in power, can see that it's a bad idea. Okay, which completely undermines democracy.
Yeah.
So
idea of democracy.
Exactly. So the whole thing's terrible. I mean, the other thing which really gets my goat is the fact that you mentioned Switzerland to everyone. Everyone says, "Oh, Switzerland, fantastic! Oh, the Alps! Oh, skiing! Oh, the United Nations." It's not so positive anyway. Okay, but everybody talks about chocolate and watches and Swiss banks. And everybody talks about this, but they don't normally mention the Swiss banks because they know that essentially it's the Nazis' stolen gold, which was stolen from Jews who then died and whose families still haven't got their money back, etc. So the Swiss tend to cover that up. Fine. But the Swiss are renowned for performing referenda.
Every Sunday.
Exactly. So this is what they want. And you say, well, that's fine. Congratulations. This is surely the purest explanation, the purest example of democracy in action. But the referenda are incredibly expensive. I said, okay, the Swiss can afford it because they've got all that stolen gold in the bank, and hey, sold loads of chocolate last year, and Rolexes aren't cheap, etc., etc., etc. Fine. But nobody seems to notice that since 2010, since the election of a national government, which, let's face it, was an extreme move for the Hungarians, because as far as I'm aware, before 2010, there wasn't really a national government. There were governments who claimed to be national, but they were always things like, well, we're national, but we're helping the Germans mainly, or we're national, but, well, there's a lot of French companies coming in and they're benefiting. So 2010, I would suggest, was a watershed when finally Hungary got a national government who said, no, we are here to do what's best for Hungary. I know the Americans are allowed to say it now, but, we were there first. Okay. But with that, since 2010, we've now had 15 referenda they're not referenda as such, they're national consultations. Yeah. But it's exactly the same thing. It's just a cheaper version because we don't have all the stolen gold that the Swiss do. So, cut us some slack here. The Swiss didn't have communism for 45 years.
You won't be allowed to Switzerland democratically.
No, slip the guy a Toblerone and then you're in, But also, people judge us very, very unfairly. They didn't have communism for 45 years. And communism is essentially saying, okay, I'd like you guys to come in and steal everything. Yep. Everything going back generations, ruin everything, destroy the economy, and then go to the IMF because you know that the great-grandchildren of these people will be paying for that, which you lived it up in luxury. Yeah. So we've got that. So we've got a double whammy. A, we were held back by this, and B, we have no money. So please, excuse us if we're not going to perform referenda. We're just going to say, look, we'll call it a national consultation. Even then, we have opposition politicians say, oh, what a waste of money. It's like, well, it's only a waste of money because you're not interested in what the people think.
The point is that in more and more occasions it pops up that for a certain and definitely influential people, the only democracy is when their ideology at power.
Exactly.
And otherwise, you can't be anything. You can't be a gentleman. You can't be Democrat. You can't be anything but a fascist, a Nazi, or whatever, but not a true democracy. And this has to change, and this has got to change.
It's got to change, but we see that they're fighting it. The European Union is fighting it. They do not want to accept it, and they don't seem to. They're not prepared to accept it. And every time we see the Prime Minister speak, the Prime Minister, when he's asked about these national consultations, he always says, he said, look, this is what the people think. I can only represent my country and the interests of my country if I know what they think. Yeah. So everybody is encouraged to vote in these national consultations.
This is a heretic idea in the eyes of many.
It is. But the beautiful thing is, here we are performing this beautiful task of democratic idealism, asking people, what do you think about this? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you think it's a good idea? And then with these millions of people standing behind him, the Hungarian Prime Minister can go to the European Commission or the European Parliament and say, sorry, this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of bloody everyone. And it carries weight, but they don't like it.
Yeah, because it's contrary to the interest. I don't get many occasions that why don't they take the effort to look into things deeper? I mean, this is in many occasions like migration, which we'll discuss in detail later, or anything else, is basically the will of the Hungarian population. And for example, when I heard horror stories about the American elections in 2020, and I was asked about the Hungarian system, it's basically, I don't know, I wouldn't call it the most perfect in the world, but basically we have made everything to, let's say, to reduce the chances of any fraud to the minimum.
Exactly.
And it's open to everybody, and basically you can have influence on how many people go to vote, how do they vote. There are always stories about that. But if it's a bigger scale something which raises the attention of people and the result comes out, we are not shy to go to the street and tell our politicians and the political elite, but we don't think so.
But exactly. But we've also had the same thing where the European Union continually, as we know, accuses us of being deficient somehow in democracy. They send observers to our elections who then go back and say, oh no, everything was fine. There was no fraud. There was no electoral fraud. And then the very next day, they'll say, well, of course, there are suspicions of electoral fraud. Say, your own people just came back and said, no, there's nothing wrong. They say, yes, but it's not useful for us to say that. We've got the same thing in America, where you can go along with a driving license that you bought in the pub yesterday, and you say, oh, what's your name? Oh, Bill. Okay, yes, would you like to vote, Bill? Yes, I would. Do you live here? Well, yes. Okay, fine. I'll take your word for it. We've got the same thing where the British are obsessed with ID cards, and they refuse to give ID card. People will not tolerate the idea of an ID card to say the government knows too much. It's like, yes, because the British government now has more security cameras per square kilometre than anywhere else in the world. So okay, there is a justifiable fear that the government is trying to discover far more about me than I really want. But without ID cards, you cannot stop voter fraud.
Yeah.
And here we get the big problem. Well, Hungarians, we don't have a problem. You've got a voter ID. Yes, you have an ID card.
And you have a list who lives in that area.
Exactly.
As simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. It really is not rocket science. I mean, here they are having all these troubles, saying things like, "Oh, look at the deficit of democracy." It's like, there's none here. There is with you, because you've got a piece of paper. It's like, oh, I wrote my name on the back of this cigarette packet. Is that okay? Of course. Come in. Vote for whoever you want. Yeah. It's a disaster.
You know what the funny thing is? The first time I learned about the European Union at university, 1997, they were already telling that there is a democratic deficit for the whole European Parliament and the European Commission because they are not directly elected.
But they are the least democratic organization known to man.
Yeah.
And we look at these people and we see the corruption, and we see the fact that there are millions of bureaucrats making money left, right, and center, not really doing anything.
Can you order millions of vaccines through SMS? What can you order through SMS?
Now, see, I can't, but Ursula von der Leyen is a very special type of German politician, because if you remember, her career in Germany was like it dropped like a stone.
Security policy expert, don't tell me. The Germans had, the Bundeswehr had, how should I say, readiness percentages way below imagination. They had 6 submarines and none of them were operational.
I mean, that would be the best one I heard. I mean, tell me if it's true or if I'm believing fallacies. Apparently, the situation got so bad, what with Ursula von der Leyen writing tenders to companies that shouldn't have won them, so the German state lost huge amounts of money, German army lost huge amounts of money, and they said at one point German soldiers were resorting to going on maneuvers, exercises, using broom handles because they didn't have enough weapons.
Could be true. Could be true on one occasion that a couple of people didn't have it or did it for fun. We still don't have, how should I say, concrete proof for that, but I can imagine it. I mean, can you imagine that out of 6 submarines, none of them is operational? Out of 200 fighter airplanes, only 20. So that was a moment where, but can you imagine that someone who is a doctor, she was a doctor, she was a social minister, suddenly turns as a defense minister, and please don't tell me, I don't believe in Renaissance men and women. So there's just no thing. When you say ignorant, I'm ignorant too. I don't know anything. I'm a historian. I don't know anything about mechanics, for example, or I can change a light bulb, but that's far how I go. So basically, please, the whole thing is so outrageous from the very moment.
But this is also typical German politics. I mean, if we look to the idea of democracy, they, via von der Leyen and via various others, Weber for another one, they accuse us of being non-democratic. But when we look to the German electoral system, then essentially it's coalitions which are made behind the scenes, which pay no attention to what people actually want. So surely if we're going to say, where is there a deficit in democracy? Well, it's over there. It's with you. Can't you see it? Are you blind? Take the blinkers off and have a look. The Germans have all these pointless coalitions where, in order to stay in power, we're going to marry this group with this group, which hate each other. These people want to destroy everything. These people want to build everything. So that's going to cancel each other out. The whole thing is a mess. And yet, we are on the receiving end all the time for being non-democratic.
Yeah, because we don't play along. And this is something I always ask that where is a democracy when you can't say no?
Exactly.
And I'm not saying I'm sent. I'm saying no.
Exactly.
So what kind of democracy is when you can only say yes? We know this democracy. It's called a people's democracy, but there's something completely
exactly.
different.
It's people's democracy in inverted commas. But the same thing, as you said earlier, that these people are all convinced that, if it's my guy in power, then that's democracy.
Yeah.
If it's not my guy in power, well, that's obviously fascism or something else. It's a dictatorship. It can't be. It's depressing.
Yeah, it is. You spoke about Germany, and
Yep.
do you know the term? Have you ever heard the term that in Germany there's a post-democratic system?
Post-democratic system.
Post-democratic system.
So is this an improvement on democracy?
No, it's something you have left behind. Democracy is behind you. You have.
We've moved on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is something, and they openly speak about it, that this is a special type of democracy when people with the knowledge and the skills and all these kind of, how should I say, dark connections decide for the voters whom to vote for. And when you see that there's a party who is castigated and almost banned in Germany, that's called AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, just because daring to say that we think differently. They had some very dark past with possessing an extremist right-wing part, but that they have cut all connections with them. And sooner or later, they are getting and becoming the most supported party in Germany. And they are oppressed, they are under the surveillance by the secret services and stuff.
But
That's post-democratic.
So this is post-democratic.
Yeah,
okay, fair enough. Because the same thing we come back to is the fact that, the AfD did have problems in the past with extreme right-wingers being in their party, but they dealt with it. But you sort of say, okay, fine. But we could look at German politics, and we could trace the roots of lots of German politicians and lots of German political parties back to say, hang on, here we are back in the 1930s, and it's like your grandfather, his great-grandfather, etc. Where do we draw the line? I mean, are we on the one hand we say, the child cannot be punished for the sins of his father. Fine. Well, in that case, the same should apply to politics. So AfD had a problem. They got rid of that problem. Yeah. So why can't they be accepted now?
Yeah, good point. I have one story for you. Did you know that the von der Leyen family was a very influential Christian Democrat family in the 70s?
Right.
And when the Rote Army Fraction, the Soviet Union supported extremist left-wing terrorist organization, threatened conservative politicians with murdering them and their families, they were, brought to UK and lived under a special defensive custody for, I think, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah?
So she is typically a member of an elite who was elite before that and stuff like that. So what are we talking about democracy? Where is democracy in that thing? And as funny as it is, there was a guy called Martin Schulz, if I remember correctly, I think it was Schulz. He was a bus driver, and he was some high-ranking member of the European Parliament or European system.
Hang on, wait. A bus driver who was a high-ranking member of the European Parliament.
Yeah, he was a former bus driver.
Okay, so
that's democratic.
Exactly,
that's
very democratic.
That's democratic. Yeah. And even though common sense is not something you learn in universities, there's books about it. You can't learn common sense in universities. So even though he was a social democrat and on many occasions he spoke complete nonsenses, but it's still something very democratic. Yeah. And I'm clearly against families inheriting power from generation to generation, whatever. They supported the Nazis, then they supported whatever, and then they support the new version of an oppressive system called European Union.
Yeah.
Who cares?
But but why don't people know this?
Because there's what they call how they call their own press? They call it the Lügenpresse, the lying press, because they realize that they are not told the truth.
So they do realize.
Yeah, but they can't do anything.
They can't.
They can't because if you rise up against the system, you immediately labeled either a left-wing communist and something strange, dangerous to the democracy, or a Nazi immediately.
But I mean, once again, we are the ones on the receiving end.
Yep.
But you see things written in the Hungarian media, which are definitely not government approved.
Pro-government.
You see things. I mean, I've pointed this out to many people. Some of the things that are said about the Prime Minister would get you arrested if you said the same things in Western European countries.
Exactly.
And
funny thing is, I used to work for an organization called Matthias Corvinus Collegium, MCC. And we had a peace conference 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we had, in my panel, we had Chinese, Indian, I think we had also German, American, I think that was all. And after that, we had after the session, we had a closed discussion. And everybody said that they are happy to come here and they're happy to speak here because they haven't felt the spirit of silence. They haven't felt the spirit of oppression of dissenting opinions. They were allowed to speak freely, and that was something they haven't felt in Europe for a long time.
But I mean, this
is Hungary. You
yeah,
know?
This is Hungary, which we are told, or which if you look at the media, you are told on a daily basis that we are a dictatorship. We are essentially on the cusp of fascism. We are.
Yeah. I'm wearing black. I'm sorry.
So we got the black shirts, and we've got to face it. I mean, this is quite brown, so I could be a brown. I could be a brown shirt, but I mean, no.
We can make a party. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, this is us.
This is us
today.
Yeah, exactly. But don't worry, people. We will keep rolling back your ignorance. Right. We'll see you next time. Have fun until then, and Balint.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
See you later.